Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
Before I read this article, and it is, it's sobering and it's unlike anything I have seen out there, which is why I want to read it for you. Before I do that, I have a request for just a little bit of help. If you are feeling like helping me, I've got an old video camera. She's traveled the world with me. We've gone to Australia, we've gone to Europe, Canada, and of course from coast to coast in the U.S., and she's finally giving up the ghost, and I have a lot of material to shoot on the road, so I'm in this position wondering what to do. I'm not going to refurbish it, it's too old, so I'm going to go and probably have to replace it. If you would like to donate $10 to help an activist out, and then I will cover the balance of whatever isn't donated, it would be huge for me. And so if you benefit from the channel and the work, less than the cost of a sushi roll, you could make my day and help tool me up to provide more video content for you moving forward. The donation link is in the description box, and I bow in your direction. Okay, there was an article that was posted on a blog page called Waging Nonviolence, People-Powered News and Analysis by a guy named Daniel Hunter. He is founder of the organization Choose Democracy, and he has done work all around the world, and he has written several books, including one called What Will You Do If Trump Wins? And Building a Movement to End the New Jim Crow. And of course, Jim Crow refers to the system of racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans in the southern states here in the U.S. in the mid-20th century, and that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, this guy is a human rights activist, and he published an article a few days ago called What to Do If the Insurrection Act is Invoked. Wait a minute. What's the Insurrection Act? And I'm embarrassed that I'm not fully aware of what that is or what's going on. But as we head toward the middle to the end of April, it is more and more on everybody's mind. It's being posted about in major news outlets. The Insurrection Act. Holy cow, this sounds important. So I did some homework. I'm going to read Daniel Hunter's words to you from April 4th of this year. I will include a link to this article in the show notes. He said, with President Trump constantly flooding the zone, there's a chance to think ahead about the possible implementation of the Insurrection Act. One of Trump's presidential actions calls for the Secretary of Defense and Homeland Security to submit a joint report by April 20th. The report will offer, quote, any recommendations regarding additional actions that may be necessary to obtain complete operational control of the southern border, including whether to invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807. President Trump loves direct control, and so it strikes me that invoking the Insurrection Act is very likely. This occasionally used provision empowers the president with few legal limitations to deploy U.S. military and federalized National Guard troops inside the country. Part of Trump's power resides in constantly growing the myth he can get away with anything. Even when he loses or retreats, he buries the news cycle with the goal of leaving people feeling more fear than awe. So when we first hear about the Insurrection Act, it may trigger our alarmism, but better to face it now before it comes than learn about it on the fly. With that in mind, I'm going to walk through some mechanisms of the Insurrection Act, then offer lessons from previously held strategy sessions I took part in that played out various scenarios. I will also offer a few suggestions for activists about what to do about it. Daniel Hunter writes, "What is the Insurrection Act?" The Insurrection Act is a dusty law that has gone without updates for 200 years. The original text states that in all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the laws, the President of the United States can call forth the militia or armed forces for the purpose of suppressing such insurrection. Technically, it is now not just one law, but a series of statutes in Title 10 of the U.S. Code. One might wonder what the law defines as an insurrection, and it's woefully undefined. Updated modern language merely calls it, quote, unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellions. While the Supreme Court has upheld that the president alone can decide the meaning of these words, it reserved for itself a chance to review the constitutionality of the military's actions, but the courts would have to enforce that provision. Notably, the Posse Comitatus Act, which blocks the military from being involved in civilian law enforcement, is suspended under the Insurrection Act. The role of the military is to, quote, assist civilian authorities but not replace them. So this is not technically martial law. In theory, Trump could order the army to go door to door searching for undocumented residents. The Coast Guard could aggressively patrol the border. Marines could be asked to shut down legal protests. Then the actions would be subject to federal court review on their constitutionality. The Insurrection Act has been used a lot. President Lincoln in the Civil War, President Grant against the Ku Klux Klan, President Johnson to end school segregation, and most recently, President Bush invoked it during the LA riots. As legal experts have said, the door is wide open for abuse. Almost 10 months ago, I joined a tabletop scenario run by the advocacy group Brennan Center for Justice. One scenario was Donald Trump invoking the Insurrection Act to secure the border and supplement ICE's ability to make arrests of undocumented immigrants across the country. We had political operatives and ex-military in the room who proceeded step by step about how orders would unfold. It was sheer chaos with some key lessons. In our scenario, when Trump ordered door-to-door raids, the military balked. Its leaders were unhappy having their personnel emerging from war zones in Afghanistan and Iraq who don't know constitutional rights, interact with civilians. Ranking military knew it was a dangerous cocktail. As I recall, NORTHCOM, the combatant command responsible for Homeland Defense, took the order, sent it to lawyers over at the Judge Advocate General's as a delay tactic, but JAG unhelpfully approved it right away. So NORTHCOM came back with insufficient plans for the full-scale operation Trump envisioned. They willingly sent troops to the border, an easy success for Trump to show, but kept their troops away from interactions with civilians. This was not good enough for Trump in our simulation. Frustrated, he tried to rearrange the military so he could give direct orders to activate National Guard troops and parts of the Army, now reordered under his Department of Defense. Sorting out a new team took some time. That was slowed down by a few mid-tier military officials, largely through extensive debates about how to pay for the unfunded and expensive operation. They were eventually fired. In our scenario, the troops were duly ordered to work in coordination with ICE. But as an accommodation, their orders were largely related to surveillance, and they did so somewhat ineffectively. Frustrated, Trump deputized right-wing militias to help on the border. Private military contractors have a real leaked $25 billion proposal to do this. Here it got dangerous fast. Private militia swarmed the border. In our scenario, the militia got too aggressive and ended up shooting 8 people who were crossing. A video of it leaked. This created public outrage. The court suddenly kicked into gear, and in our scenario, Trump fired the militia quietly, declaring them a massive success, and turned back to the trained military. Here were some of the broad takeaways from our exercise. The courts were fully ineffective at slowing things down early and could only win cases after constitutional violations. Trump, as usual, would claim massive powers to act with impunity and shock his opposition, but his actual ability was moderately restrained by a reluctant military and public outrage. Our scenario did not play out beyond this point. Almost a year ago, I published scenarios of a Trump presidency in an interactive guide, What If Trump Wins? One scenario explored Trump ordering the Insurrection Act on day 1 of his presidency, so I'm surprised he has waited this long. If Trump's regime was stacked with brilliant but ruthless tacticians, use of the Insurrection Act would be merely a prelude to a greater restriction of freedoms beyond the border, culminating in the use of the military against protesters in blue state cities. While Project 2025 is a roadmap, I'm less convinced of their ability to plan long term. Signalgate and self-defeating tariffs via, quote, instinct should avail us of that. And crucially, the sycophants at the top do not have the trust or knowledge of their institutions. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth can give orders, but his ignorance limits his ability to move things through the bureaucracy. Perhaps the delay in invoking the Insurrection Act has been to make sure Trump's people are in place. More than anything, they're winging it. Move fast, break things, don't apologize, keep breaking things. One should note the narrowness of Trump's proclamation that could lead to the Insurrection Act being invoked. It's framed as being used for operational control of the southern border, not broader mass deportation or, what some of us feared, targeting nearly all anti-Trump political activity. This means the Insurrection Act may be initially more focused. Folks on the border will bear the brunt of further militarization, despite an already heavily militarized border where crossings have dropped dramatically. Trump's desire to criminalize protest against him is obvious. ICE is effectively kidnapping green card holders who have only exercised their freedom of speech, such as Muhammad Kali and Rumiesa Ozturk. One executive order attempts to criminalize protesting in Washington, D.C., and the FBI is on a McCarthy-like venture looking for, quote, domestic terrorism among anti-Tesla protests. It therefore appears that Trump would relish the opportunity to use the Insurrection Act more broadly against opponents. If the first move is somewhat limited in scope, the border and ICE enforcement, then he will look for a violent spark that he can claim as pretext to expand the scope more widely. Violence at protests could be the quickest way for him to get there. This could take the form of protesters engaging in disciplined acts of property destruction, but better for Trump if there were scenes of bloody street fights. If his opponents don't hand it to him, prepare for him to egg on already twitchy counter-protesters or use agent provocateurs. Violence in the streets feeds Trump's strongman image. This is consistent with the authoritarian playbook. Authoritarians love some violence in the street. It allows them to swoop in with crackdowns they claim will protect the population from criminals. In fact, ordinary, scared people may even call for crackdowns to, quote, restore peace. To make these moves backfire, we can actively project calm and communicate a commitment to order, kindness, and nonviolence. We can use positive messaging and calmly explain the likelihood of future repression in a way that reduces fear. We can behave in ways that inspire, like mass dancing in the street or standing clearly for values like Sunrise Movement's protest with school desks outside the threatened Department of Education. If they can't bait the movement into violence, then they'll almost certainly instigate it. In 1990 Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic called upon the paramilitary to show up at the same date and location of planned opposition protests. When inevitable violence happened, he'd order the military to crack down severely on protesters. This seems like a playbook Trump would know how to follow. Once a pretext is declared, our fight cannot be internally about how we got there. Whether there's violence by agent provocateurs or frustrated folks from our side, we have to seek unity amongst the broadest coalition. Our response has to be swift and unified. We need to loudly condemn all state-sanctioned violence, including physical attacks, threats, and inequality that have pushed us to this moment, saying the gross acts of violence are on one side, the kidnapping of protesters, the bombing of civilians around the globe, and the assaults to the Constitution. We decry all violence and Trump's attempts to divide us. We are a peaceful people who want freedom. If Trump uses the Insurrection Act, the ways to constrain him are largely by public pressure, a reluctant military and courts after gross violations. Political strategist Anat Shenkar-Osario has defined 3 strategies for public pressure in these times: refusal, resistance, and ridicule. Number 1, refusal. Few of us are situated to encourage the military's refusal to obey unethical orders. It's the most top-down institution in our society. Still, while many of the top military and its lawyers may now be toothless loyalists, officers are positioned to gum up orders. Some of this is happening already. As veterans and others are talking to folks in the military, more of that will be needed by those in a position to influence the military. Another method of refusal comes from our scenario planning sessions. It's based on the technicality that the National Guard cannot be activated twice. So governors can activate their National Guard, and then the federal government can't repurpose them. Among border states, one could conceive of Democratic governors in California, New Mexico, and Arizona, but not Ruby Red Texas, calling up the National Guard by mid-April, before the Insurrection Act is invoked. Number 2, resistance. To date, Americans have engaged in an awful lot of resistance. Our protests have been far more numerous and frequent than in 2017, with over 2 times more protests in 2025 than 2017. Resistance should start with updating Know Your Rights trainings when interacting with military, reaffirming protest laws and jurisdiction, and remembering that military officers and rank and file know little about constitutional rights to protest. Because of that, we should learn to document, videotape everything for your protection, the inevitable court cases, and for stoking public outrage. A reminder of how extreme this can get comes from Portland, where Trump ordered terrible crackdowns on protests by federal troops in 2020. Unidentified federal forces scooped up protesters and threw them into vans. National outrage was dimmed by the narrative that protests in Portland were violent. This is a further reminder of how petty violence is the spark the administration wants, and how we need a simple message. We are not violent. Trump is. Governors can now assist by placing the frame back on the real crisis people are living through. They can activate their National Guards to address housing and affordability crises, assist with the depleted efforts of FEMA and CDC from DOJ's cuts. This is both tactical and reframes the issue. Should those of us concerned about Trump's actions organize a mass protest right after an Insurrection Act is ordered? My current thinking is no. Rushing to the streets with future fears, especially if his order is somewhat targeted, will likely backfire. The vast majority of Americans see border security as a legitimate issue. Shouting fire isn't the only way to get people out of the building. And number 3, ridicule. Thankfully, we have yet another option. In the face of the overwhelming terror, this is something we've seen less of. There have been ads mocking Musk, Tesla now with white power steering, or Tesla goes from 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds, the swastika. There's the hack into government offices with an AI video of Trump kissing Musk's feet, or the TikTokers hunting Teslas with anti-Musk messages, the most recalled truck in 2024. But there's so much more ridicule that can be done. I'm raising options here, hoping we can open this box more. It's important because folks are going to tune out if nearly all of our moves are decry, decry, decry. Humor is important for our psyches and to take fascists down a notch. Beautiful Trouble reports on the clandestine, insurgent, rebel clown army, trained by professional clowns who, quote, filled their pockets with so much strange junk that it took hours and lots of paperwork when stop and searches occurred. A favorite tactic was to walk into Army recruitment agencies and in a clownish way try to join up, thus causing so much chaos that the agencies had to close down for the day, and then the clowns would set up their shabby recruitment stall outside. Humor is key for morale and exposing the vulnerability of the strongman image. When Russia effectively banned protest, activists in the Siberian city of Barnaul organized a toy protest. Lego characters and tiny figurines took to the streets. The humor only grew as the police clumsily arrested all the figurines. And the word arrested here is in quotation, so it was all apparently theater. After Milosevic accused the nonviolent movement Otpor of terrorism, they organized terrorist fashion shows, where regular folks stood up in their casual everyday wear. Clearly a terrorist, look at his glasses, he must be a reader. Or after their offices were raided, they made a very public re-entry into their building with a moving van full of boxes. Media trailed them. As expected, police stopped the van and took the boxes. This turned to humiliation as police lifted the boxes and found them all empty, leaving Optur the opportunity to say they are fearful of everything. I'm hoping some ideas may be brewing for you. What about Tesla test drives with disorderly clowns, toy protests along the border? What if we appear with empty boxes after the Insurrection Act is invoked with insurrection scrawled on the outside? Or we could go in a totally different direction and have people applaud the move. A bunch of us simultaneously come out with press releases saying, we're so glad Donald Trump is finally going after insurrectionists. We assume he's going to declare his pardons of January 6th insurrectionists null and void, and then, remarkably, turn himself in. This brings the frame back to his lawlessness, and it brings up one of his most unpopular acts to date, pardoning January 6th insurrectionists. Folks could amplify this call with street theater, with pictures of Trump and the January 6th insurrection and signs saying, we're with Trump, get the insurrectionists. Some could go to the border and hand maps to military officers with the location of the insurrectionists, Washington, D.C., and be utterly confused about why undocumented folks are getting targeted. The image we want to raise is one that contrasts law-abiding undocumented folks woven into our community versus the lawless cabal of mostly white men that Trump lifts up as heroes. This is the contrast that helps build public outrage. Admittedly, this won't stop bad things from happening. At this stage, there's no strategy that assures that, but setting ourselves up with the storyline we keep telling helps us stoke public outrage so that when awful things happen, we can move people to action. All of this is bigger than just decrying Trump's use of the Insurrection Act, which risks just sounding shrill. We need to pitch the bigger story and spark actions about more than just the potential risks of the Insurrection Act. Yes, this is about law and respect for each other. This is about the fear that Trump and his lawless brothers in arms are trying to provoke. By adding a little ridicule into our mix, we can help shake up and shape that story. Okay, I have a few thoughts on this article. Let me take a short break and talk just a little bit more about that in just a moment. Today we're talking about the Insurrection Act of 1807, a rarely used law that would allow the president to use federal military troops or federalized National Guard troops to suppress our protests or other civil disturbances, conveniently, subjectively, and vaguely defined. Of course, given Trump's history, what we're talking about is you and me going into the streets and protesting publicly and saying, no, we are not a Christian nation and Project 2025 is bullshit and due process is not happening with people kidnapped by ICE and it's an atrocity. LGBT people are people who deserve safety and equality. Doge isn't a legitimate entity, and the use of Doge is a violation of security, American privacy, and our rights. We are a democracy, not a monarchy. We are not a nation of kings. Our founders came here to escape the king. That kind of protest, public demonstration, messaging could be called a danger brought by the enemy from within, and then Trump could invoke the Insurrection Act to prosecute and punish you and me. This is classic authoritarianism. Now, I like the idea of beautiful trouble, which was invoked. There was a phrase that was in the article that I just read for you, good trouble, right? Which means we need to go out and make resistance our duty. What is that line? When injustice becomes law, resistance is our duty. This article was released right before the Hands Off 2025 protests, which took place in 1,500 cities all around the United States and across the ocean as well. The whole world seeing protests rising up as people say, hands off our Social Security, hands off our civil servants and their jobs, hands off our decision to participate or not participate in a faith tradition, to have or not have, express or not express a religious belief in a secular democracy. Hands off our judges, the ones that you have been threatening when they don't rule in a way that you want. Hands off the United States Constitution and free citizens who will fight to be free. And as I talked about in a video that I published a few days ago that you can find on the Thinking Atheist channel, I participated in one of those protests in Tulsa, Oklahoma, wondering what's it going to be like here. Like, will folks actually show up in Jesus Town, Oklahoma? I mean, strawberry red Oklahoma, what's going to happen? And then for those of us that are out there, are people going to be hurling bricks at us from their car windows? I mean, a lot of us were weird. I was talking to a couple of protesters. There was a woman who said that her husband didn't want her to come out. She's like, he's worried that I'm going to get hurt. She refused to stay home. She came out anyway. There was another person. They lived more than a mile away. They didn't even get in a car. They just walked all the way down and joined us with their sign. I mean, holding the sign for a mile by herself. It was awesome. I ran into a couple of retired school teachers, well-informed, well-motivated, and very concerned about the state of the United States. And we all bonded right there on the street corner. And as I said in the video, as we kind of waved our placards expecting the worst, we saw overwhelming support in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Okay, a few people drove by, windows down, flipping us off. One guy had a cell phone case, and I couldn't read there was some small print, but there were two big words, top and bottom, Trump, Jesus. That's all I saw was Trump, Jesus. So I'm guessing Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president, or something like that. There was one woman who is the exact person you would expect to be a Trump voter, about 30, blonde hair. She looks like every press secretary that Donald Trump has ever hired. And she's like, Trump, we love Trump, and then she scoots down as if she's actually done something. There was one other woman. She was wrapped in a flag. She actually wrapped herself in a flag with the word Trump on it. And she had a bullhorn screaming, we love Trump. There was one guy who had the Sons of Trump t-shirt on, and he was going down and taking selfies with the protesters. I'm guessing he's got his own channel somewhere, so he was going back to do commentary. Okay, fine. We saw some of that, but not very much. 7, 8, 9 examples of this kind of thing in 3 hours? Are you shitting me? We saw people who were honking their horns, waving their hands, rolling down the windows, smiling, cheering. One car had people, they were pouring out of the sunroof, half their bodies up, and they were like, yeah, go get them, solidarity. It was wild. In this state, people are pissed. Something is going on. There is actually a shift in the thinking of a lot of these red staters who naively thought a vote for Trump meant cheaper eggs. And now they're looking around going, hey, wait a minute. I don't give a shit about Greenland. I don't want to annex Canada. What the hell's what's going on? I don't want to pay twice as much for something because everybody got tariffed except for Putin. Trump's tariffing the penguins on uninhabited islands. I did not want that. This is not what I voted for. And they are actually waking up. I'm not saying I have a whole lot of sympathy for them, but I am saying that there is a shift that is taking place. I wanted to talk about the signs at the protest because this speaks to ridicule. And we talk about how you got to knock the kings down a few rungs. They take themselves so seriously. What's the best antidote for that? You ridicule the hell out of them. Ridicule them. And so many of the signs that people handmade and brought out were signs of mockery and defiance. One guy had a cardboard sign with a quote from The Big Lebowski, and it said, "This aggression will not stand, man." Cities across the United States saw people bringing their pets to the protest. There was one golden retriever who had a sign on his back, and it said, "Bad Doge." Another sign said, "They're eating the checks. They're eating the balances." One of my favorites had a picture of Donald Trump with the caption, "Imagine this car filled with bees." I don't know what city this took place in, but it's gold. A protester showed up wearing a costume. The costume was a bag of Cheetos, holding the sign that said, "When he goes to hell, does this mean he is a flaming hot Cheeto?" Style points for that. Another sign, it was the fuck around this stuff times. It was the find outest of times. One colorful placard said, "But it was the Gulf of Mexico at birth." Here's a gem, complete with emojis on a handwritten sign that said, honk if you never texted secret war plans. And you know people were honking their horns and driving by all day. That's just awesome. And there were the emojis, the fist and the upside down flag and the fire. So bad, even the introverts are here. In Tulsa, I had a listener named Jake come out. He found me out on the line. His sign was gold. He said, make idiocracy fiction again. A tall poster had side by side Donald Trump and Jim Jones of Jonestown, the cult leader that convinced 900 followers to drink poison and kill themselves for God. The caption said, the difference between Trump and Jim Jones is that Trump would charge you for the Kool-Aid. Here's one that said, know your parasites. And it had photographs and everything. Ticks, worms, and billionaires. Here's a gem. It says, MAGA America. Come for the measles. Stay for the secret kidnapping to a foreign prison camp. All in all, you're just another prick with no wall. There was one woman, I'm guessing an educator. She had a sign that said, science keeps your dumbass alive. There was a woman wearing an American flag around her neck. She had a sign that said, Wisconsin hates Elon so much, it could be one of his kids. I think that kind of stuff is critical. It's not just fun. We must ridicule the ridiculous and those who say, you will take us seriously. We look them in the face and say, we absolutely will not. And I think the evidence shows, and I'm going to call it evidence, even though it's a bit subjective and not all that scientific, but I'm going to call it evidence that the MAGA culture is selling a savior more than a message. It's like Jeanine Pirro on Fox News. What did she say when her 401k tanked? I think she said something like, I trust this man. Trust in Trump. That is what they're selling. When people came by, they were just shouting a name. Trump, Trump, we love Trump, Trump. It was very much a cult of personality, tethering themselves to one person. While we in the resistance, beyond the mockery, we had a message. We're a democracy, not a monarchy. What is happening is not normal. No kings, equality for all. My own sign had a picture of Donald Trump. As the White House social media account had posted that image of him wearing a crown over the caption, Long live the king. And I quoted Thomas Jefferson. I was much an enemy to monarchy before I came to Europe. I am 10,000 times more so since I have seen what they are. Messaging, not a man. Big difference. The next hands-off demonstration, I believe, is coming up on the 19th of this month. I'm going to be at the American Atheist National Convention, so I won't be able to demonstrate. But I'm curious to see if we top the 5+ million number that we saw on the 5th of April. It feels like outrage is rising. And of course, the day after April 19th is the day that it is possible Donald Trump will implement the Insurrection Act. What is going to happen? I do not know. I welcome your comments about how to proceed, how to properly protest, what we can and should be doing. But I wanted to bring you what the Insurrection Act is, what the implications might be, and what's coming here in the last half of the month of April. I'll finish with the thought that I had in a discussion with a friend who was saying, protest really isn't my thing. It's not for me. And I was thinking about what he said, and I said, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution specifically protects peaceful protest as a form of expression. The language references freedom of speech, the press, the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Women were not allowed to vote before 1920. It was only after the women's suffrage protests that they were given that right, or actually they took that right for themselves. Black Americans were only given protections after the civil rights protests of the 1960s. Unjust wars like Vietnam were protested, even by Vietnam veterans, and they considered their public protest a duty, a patriotic duty. What are the protections that we still have for LGBT people, if not the result of strong, fierce protest? Protest is a critical, necessary form of expression that communicates to those in power the opinions of the people. It also sends a message to those in public office, and it serves as a physical representation of how free speech operates outside of a police state. I'm reminded of that graphic that shows the plank that leads out over the cliff, and there's one powerful person on the end of the plank, and there's like 50 people over here on the other. And all we have to do is decide we're not going to hold up the authoritarian anymore. Resistance movements have been necessary throughout our history, and we must resist this idea that you and I are the insurrectionists, when truthfully we are the ones who are trying to defend a secular government, democracy, and decency. We watch the headlines and we press on. Thank you so much for listening.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.